The early morning light poured through the kitchen window, casting long shadows over the dusty floorboards of Henry Miller's farmhouse. It was September, and the trees outside had begun to turn, their leaves flickering between gold and orange. It was beautiful, but it didn't matter anymore. It hadn't for a long time. 3 years had passed since Margaret, his wife, had passed. It had been quiet then, 2 long, empty days that felt like they were slipping through his fingers. But today something felt different. The air had a weight to it, thick with the anticipation of something he couldn't name. The house, too, seemed to hold its breath, like it was waiting for something, or someone, to arrive. At 74, Henry had grown accustomed to the silence. The solitude was part of his routine, as inevitable as the seasons. But even now, in the early mornings, when the light was soft and everything felt a little fragile, he would still catch himself looking for Margaret. A glimpse of her in the kitchen, humming as she made coffee. Her voice echoing in his mind like a faint melody he couldn't quite remember. He sipped his coffee slowly, staring out at the dense woods that bordered his backyard. Beyond the stretch of his garden, Willow Stream wound its way through the forest, its soft murmurs a constant reminder of the natural world he'd spent so many years building around him. But today it wasn't just the stream that caught his eye. A movement, a shadow, large and lumbering, moved through the trees. First, Henry thought it was a deer. But as he squinted, he realized it wasn't a deer. No, this was something much bigger. Something that had no business being here in the middle of his backyard. A bear. And not just one bear. 3. A bear family. The mother, large and powerful, was leading her cubs carefully through the underbrush. Henry stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in his chest. His first thought was simple: what do they want? For days after the bear family's arrival, Henry watched them in silence. They came and went, moving with the rhythm of the forest, always in the same careful pattern. The mother, strong and steady, led her cubs across the wild edge of his property. They never ventured too far into the yard, staying close to the edge where the trees began. But they were there, unmistakable and undeniable. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were doing more than simply passing through. There was something in the way they moved, deliberate and cautious, as though they knew exactly where to go, yet hesitated just a little before making their way. The stream, the one that cut through his land like a silver ribbon, was their boundary. Every time, they paused at its edge, and Henry noticed something strange. They hesitated at the stream, especially the cubs, who would look to the mother for guidance before stepping into the water. It was shallow, but when the autumn rains came, the current swelled, making it difficult for smaller creatures to cross. That's when the idea came to him, quietly, like all his best ideas used to do. He would build a bridge. Henry had never been much of a gardener, though he loved the peaceful stillness of nature. He had spent his younger years as an architect, drawing blueprints and watching his creations rise from the ground. The houses and commercial buildings he designed in Burlington were practical, sturdy, and functional. But now, out here in the wilderness, the only thing that mattered was simplicity. A simple bridge, nothing more than a narrow path of cedar planks to let animals pass over the stream during the rains. No railings, no decorations, just something that could help the creatures, especially the bears. He'd watched them struggle with the water before, and somehow, he couldn't stand the thought of them fighting against the current again. He started with sketches, quick, rough drawings on scrap paper, measuring out the span of the stream. At first, it felt almost silly building a bridge for wildlife. But as he looked out at the family of bears, something stirred in him, a deep sense of purpose. If the bridge could ease their struggle, maybe it could ease his, too. He hadn't realized it yet, but he was beginning to think of them not as animals crossing his property, but as a kind of strange, silent companionship. It wasn't an easy project. Henry's body wasn't what it used to be. His joints ached, and his back protested every time he lifted a cedar post. His hands, once calloused from years of drafting, were soft now, a little too delicate for the rough work of digging and hauling wood. But he pushed through. The bridge had to be built. The first few days were slow. He felt every muscle he had, every ache and strain of his aging body. He worked in the mornings when the air was cool, when the sunlight filtered through the trees at the perfect angle. It was still early autumn, but the crispness in the air was a reminder of what was coming winter. As he dug holes for the posts and laid down the planks, the forest around him seemed to watch. Squirrels scurried overhead, unbothered by his presence. A red-tailed hawk circled lazily above, its sharp eyes keen and calculating. And the stream, normally a gentle whisper, flowed steadily beneath him, its voice steady but growing louder as the days passed. But it wasn't just the forest that had an interest in the bridge. Henry set up a motion-activated camera on an old oak tree near the edge of the woods. Margaret had always talked about the secret lives of the creatures, how the woods held stories no one ever got to hear. She'd even said once, laughing, that the forest had its own soap opera, with deer, raccoons, and foxes playing roles in some drama just beyond their view. He wanted to capture some of that drama, to catch a glimpse of what really happened when the lights were off and the world went quiet. The camera was a quiet thing, an afterthought at first. But as Henry worked, he began to feel that it might give him more than just a record of animals using the bridge. It might reveal something else, something he hadn't anticipated. It might give him a sense of connection, a way to witness life unfolding outside his own. For days after the bridge was completed, Henry couldn't stop checking the camera. He'd installed it to capture wildlife moving across the bridge, but he found himself staring at it for far longer than he had ever intended. The anticipation had taken root inside him. He wanted to see, to know what lived beyond the woods, beyond the reach of his porch. But for days the camera remained quiet. No bears, no deer, nothing. He had almost begun to wonder if his bridge was destined to remain an unused, unnecessary piece of woodwork when something finally appeared in the footage. It was a single frame at first, barely perceptible in the dim light. Something large, its dark form moving slowly across the bridge, stepping carefully on the wooden planks. Henry leaned in closer to his laptop screen, eyes narrowing in disbelief. He hit play. The mother bear came into focus, her massive form dark against the light of early morning. She stepped onto the bridge with the deliberateness of one who had been there before. Behind her, the cubs followed, smaller but just as cautious. The scene unfolded like a delicate dance, each movement careful, intentional. She tested each plank before committing fully to the bridge, then led her young across, one step at a time, as if she had known about this place for much longer than Henry had imagined. A lump rose in Henry's throat. He watched the footage over and over, mesmerized. This wasn't just an animal crossing a bridge. It was something more, something sacred, as if the bears had discovered a secret pathway that would change their lives forever. They moved like shadows, slowly, purposefully, until they reached the other side. The mother paused at the end of the bridge, nose twitching in the air, as if she could sense something unseen, something unspoken. Then, without warning, she looked directly at the camera. Her eyes, dark and deep, locked with Henry's, and for a moment, the world stood still. It was as if the bear knew he was watching, knew that, in his own way, he had given her something, a gift, something that had made her journey a little easier. Henry sat back in his chair, a mixture of awe and disbelief washing over him. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but there was no mistaking it. The bears had come, and they had used the bridge. It wasn't just a crossing for the animals. It was something more, a bridge between two worlds. The world of the humans and the world of the wild, both sides now bound by a shared moment of quiet connection. The next morning, Henry went outside, coffee cup in hand, to the spot by the stream where the bridge met the land. He watched the mist rise from the water's surface, the cool morning air crisp against his skin. There was something about the quiet now, something different. The house still felt empty, but somehow less so. The absence of Margaret had always been a hollow, painful ache. But now, in the mornings, as he stood at the edge of the stream, he didn't feel entirely alone. The bears had found their way across, yes, but maybe, just maybe, they had found him, too. Henry returned to the house and checked the camera once more, eager to see if the bears had come back. He wanted to know if this was a one-time thing, or if his unexpected visitors would return. As he scrolled through the footage, his breath caught. The footage wasn't from the night before, but from that very morning. The camera had caught the mother bear again, alone this time. She stood in the yard, gazing back at the house from a distance, her dark eyes reflecting the quiet wonder of the morning light. She stood for a moment, just watching. And then, as if she knew exactly where she belonged, she turned and disappeared back into the woods. The days that followed felt different. Henry found himself waking early, the excitement of the bridge project stirring inside him. He had never expected the bears to use it so quickly. For weeks, he had felt a quiet sense of connection with them, an unspoken understanding that their paths had crossed for a reason. But it wasn't until that morning, when the mother bear had turned to look back at the house, that Henry understood. They weren't just passing through. They had become a part of his world. It was a strange feeling, this uninvited companionship. He'd never been someone who considered himself a nature person in the traditional sense. Sure, he loved the sound of the stream and the occasional sight of a deer grazing at the forest's edge. But the idea of sharing his space with wild animals, it was unsettling at first. Yet, with each passing day, the bears felt less like intruders and more like visitors. Their presence was no longer just a curiosity. It was a comfort. Then came the storm. The rain fell in torrents, turning the stream into a raging force. Henry woke to the sound of it, the water slapping against the rocks, roaring with an intensity that unsettled him. The trees shook violently in the wind. Henry's heart raced as he imagined the bridge, the one he had worked so hard to build, now being torn away by the floodwaters. It had been a simple structure, after all, wooden planks unreinforced against the power of nature. What if it hadn't held? He grabbed his raincoat, pulled on his boots, and made his way outside, his steps sloshing through the mud as the wind howled around him. His heart thudded in his chest with every step. As he approached the stream, he could hear the bridge creaking under the weight of the swollen current. He rushed to the edge, half expecting to see it swept away, leaving nothing but broken wood behind. But it was still there. The bridge, though battered by the storm, stood strong. The cedar planks, wet from the rain, reflected the muted light of the morning, and the posts were firmly planted into the banks. It had held. Henry exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But as he stood there, a sense of dread crept into his gut. The stream had risen, flooding the banks and turning the shallow crossing into a raging river. Even with the bridge intact, it was a dangerous crossing. He had no doubt the bears would attempt it again, but what if it was too much for them? What if they couldn't make it across in time? He thought of the mother bear, her careful movements, her constant vigilance. The cubs were small, vulnerable. They were still learning, still finding their footing in the world. What if they fell in? What if the current swept them away? An unsettling thought gnawed at him. Had he built the bridge to help them or put them in danger? Henry's thoughts spiraled. He paced back and forth on the bank, hands shaking, heart racing. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to make the bridge safer, more secure, but there was no time. The storm was still raging, and he couldn't undo what had already been done. And then, just as quickly as his panic had risen, something caught his eye. There, just beyond the bridge, a figure appeared. At first, Henry thought it was a trick of the light, the rain distorting the view. But no, there it was again, moving with purpose. The mother bear. She stepped into the water, her heavy paws testing the current. She paused, eyes scanning the water, and then, she stepped onto the bridge. Henry froze, his breath caught in his chest. The mother bear didn't hesitate. With a strength and grace that left him in awe, she crossed the bridge, one paw at a time, leading her cubs behind her. It wasn't just the bridge that held firm in that moment. It was her. She was confident, calm, and sure. The cubs followed, testing the water but trusting their mother's guidance. They moved slowly but steadily, making their way across with only a few moments of hesitation. When they reached the other side, Henry couldn't move. He watched, heart pounding, as the mother bear turned her head toward him. It was as if she had known he was there, watching, hoping. Her eyes met his, and in that brief, fleeting moment, Henry felt something that wasn't just relief, it was recognition. She had done it. She had led her family across the raging waters, safe and sound. It was then that he understood. The bridge wasn't just a gift for the bears. It was a bridge for him, too. A bridge that had brought him back to life in a way he hadn't expected. A bridge that connected him to something larger than himself. The storm may have been fierce, but the bridge had held. The bear family had crossed, and in doing so, they had saved him. In the days following the storm, Henry couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. The mother bear, her cubs following her so closely, crossing the bridge with such confidence and care. It was a moment of quiet triumph, one that stayed with him like a warm memory, even as the cold winds of early winter began to settle into the woods. But something had shifted inside him. It wasn't just the bear's survival that had struck him. It was the sense of purpose that had come with it. He had built that bridge to help them, yes, but now, in the stillness of his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had done something for him in return. The days were growing shorter, and the forest was turning quickly toward winter. The streams were beginning to freeze at the edges, and the animals had begun to prepare for the cold months ahead. But Henry found himself still checking the footage, still hoping for another glimpse of the bear family. It wasn't that he had nothing else to do. He'd spent years designing, building, and crafting homes. But now, in this quiet corner of the world, with his wife gone, he felt something he hadn't in years. He felt alive, connected. He felt as though he was part of something larger than himself, something wild and untamed. One evening, as he sat watching the camera feed, he saw something that made his heart skip. It wasn't just the familiar dark shapes of the bears crossing the bridge again. No, this time something was different. There was a softness to their movement, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. The cubs, who had once been hesitant and uncertain, now moved with confidence. Their once clumsy steps had become sure, each one of them mastering the bridge as their mother had. Henry rewound the footage, his eyes scanning every frame. And then it hit him. The bears had changed. Not just in size, but in the way they interacted with the world around them. They were learning from each other, teaching each other. And then, in the next frame, something even more startling appeared. The mother bear, who had once been wary of Henry's presence, stood at the edge of the yard again. This time, she didn't just glance at the house. She approached it, slowly, cautiously, as though testing the boundaries of this strange human world. Her cubs stayed a few paces behind her, watching their mother, learning from her as she moved closer to the porch. They were learning what it meant to trust, what it meant to step into unknown spaces. It was a small thing, a moment, but to Henry it was everything. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. The bears weren't just surviving because of the bridge. They were thriving because of it. They were learning, adapting, and growing in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the real revelation, what took him even longer to understand, was this: they weren't the only ones who were changing. The presence of the bear family, the quiet companionship they had brought to his life, had slowly begun to heal him, too. In their daily routines, in the way they crossed the bridge, in their careful, deliberate movements, Henry saw something he had lost. He saw resilience, patience, and, above all, trust. It had taken time, but the truth was undeniable. The bears were teaching him something profound. In their presence, he was learning how to move on, how to be still and patient, to trust in the world again, to stop searching for the past and start living in the present. He thought of Margaret then, her voice, her laughter, her sketches of the world they had shared. He missed her more than he could put into words. But in the bear family's quiet, unexpected guidance, he was beginning to understand that there was more to life than what he had once believed. Perhaps it wasn't about the grand gestures or the years of work that defined a life. Maybe it was the simple moments, the ones that came when you least expected them, that truly mattered. He leaned back in his chair, the warmth of the fire on his face. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, he felt a strange calm. The bridge, which he had built to help the bears, had done something else entirely. It had connected him to something far greater than himself. As winter settled in, Henry found himself reflecting on the strange, quiet year he had lived through with the bear family. The bridge, once just a project born from a desire to help, had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. The bears had become a part of his life, their visits marking the changing seasons in ways that gave him a sense of continuity he hadn't felt since Margaret's death. The cold of winter crept into the farmhouse, and with it came a stillness that was different from the loneliness he had known before. The bears had vanished into the woods for their denning season, but they were always there, in his thoughts, in the hum of the quiet house. The bridge had become more than just a structure. It was a symbol of something larger, something shared between the world of man and the world of wild. It was a place of connection. Henry continued to monitor the camera feeds, now empty of bear traffic, but he wasn't disappointed. His heart didn't ache as it once had for the company he had lost. The bear family had given him something he hadn't expected, a purpose beyond the solitude, a new kind of connection, one that didn't require human presence to feel alive. Then, one early spring morning, Henry woke with the sense that something had changed again. The snow had finally begun to retreat, and the air was sharp with the promise of warmer days ahead. He grabbed his coffee and went to his usual spot by the stream, where the bridge stood, waiting patiently for the animals to return. The morning light was softer now, gentle and warm, casting golden hues over the still, quiet landscape. And then he saw it. A shadow moved through the trees at the far edge of his yard. Henry froze, heart skipping a beat. It was the bear family. But this time there was something new. The cubs were no longer small. They had grown significantly. The mother, Hazel, was still as commanding as ever, but her once cautious cubs were now nearly as large as she was. They moved with the same confidence she had, the same careful precision, their bodies strong and sure. The time had come for them to leave. Henry watched them from a distance, his breath caught in his throat. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when the bears would move on, leaving the bridge, leaving his life. He had always known it would happen, but the reality was harder to face than he had imagined. The mother bear paused at the bridge, as though sensing the significance of the moment. She stood there for a long while, her gaze fixed on the empty space where they had once crossed so many times. Henry had never been so close to her, never so aware of the bond they had shared over the seasons. She seemed to acknowledge it just as she had before. Then, in a single graceful movement, she crossed the bridge with her cubs following behind. It was a silent goodbye, a crossing that marked the end of a chapter. The bears were no longer the small family they had once been. They were independent now, capable of surviving on their own, ready to leave their mark on the world just as the bridge had left its mark on them. Henry didn't feel sad. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction in his chest. The bridge had done what he had hoped. It had served its purpose, not just as a path for the bears, but as a quiet testament to the fragile, fleeting connections that could exist between species. He had been a part of something, a small, quiet part of their journey, and that was enough. He stood there, watching them disappear into the woods. And as the sun rose higher, warming the land, Henry felt the weight of the years, of all the things he had built, all the things he had lost, and all the things he had learned. In the end, the bridge wasn't just a physical structure. It was a legacy that would continue long after he was gone.